I'm an African, but more than anything, it brings me great pride to name those two as my parents because they are my roots, my best reflection, and my greatest teachers. I'm also a mother, a sister, a writer, a journalist by profession, and a creative. I am someone who's hugely passionate about issues that affect Black Africans. Kitso Ke Pheko. That's Setswana for knowledge is a remedy, or knowledge is the remedy. I came to that title based on my experience in trying to bring up the kind of issues that I hope this platform will cover. I've noticed that every time I try to bring up issues that affect us and our heritage and our growth and our progress as Black people, always ruffle a feather, touch a nerve, or bring about a certain kind of discomfort. I mean, these discussions or conversations never end well. And then I wondered, how are we going to have difficult conversation if they keep on bringing us further apart? And then I realized, or maybe I thought, the problem might be that these discussions or debates are not so informed. So we are arguing from places that need background, need information, and need solutions. So I thought maybe the best way to do this is to speak to individuals, icons if you may, who've dedicated their lives or their life's work or their careers to exploring these issues, to covering them, to digging deeper into them, and to understanding them not only for themselves, but for us as a collective. And I will hook up with these individuals one by one to hear what they can teach us about these things that we more often than not argue about. My hope by exploring these subjects is that we can understand how we got here and maybe start thinking about if we'd like to get out of these small traps that came before us and were built for us, whether we like to admit it or not. But language, I feel, is the place to begin. Language is the biggest reflection of how we've lost who we are or are losing who we really are. And I say this without fear, without judgment, and without favor. As it is, I'm doing this in English because it's easier for me to do so. Ke Motswana, ke tsala ke Batswana, but my Tswana is nowhere near my English. That alone should tell you how important this subject is. Language, I feel, is the first thing that reflects who you really are. You can have 10 Black people in the room. The first thing that's going to expose who they really are is their language. I first grappled with the idea of language as a Black person as an 11 or 12-year-old in Soweto. And it was because of a song I heard. This song raised so many questions in my head. I was already exposed to some of the issues the song brought up in my mind, but I wasn't thinking hard enough about them until I really listened to this song.
Batingi abulisa ngiti sawubona, Dati what you talking about? Batingi abulisa ngiti sawubona, Dati don't talk a similar language. Batingi abulisa ngiti sawubona, Dati what you talking about? Batingi abulisa ngiti sawubona, Dati don't talk a similar language.
I think as Africans, we have a main battle with language, and it's whether our languages are good enough or if English is above them. I think the world has created this notion that we are better if we speak good English than we are when we excel in our mother tongues. Listen to this. I think it explains what I'm trying to say a lot better.
I've always wondered since then, why is my language being described as vernacular? I came to realize it was because of colonialism. Colonialism came to Africa, and one of the remaining symptoms of this project was turning Africans against their own languages, their own cultures and traditions. As a village boy in school, I've always been seen as an outcast, because when I speak my English, which I wanted to learn, it has always had an effect of the tribe language I come from. So I never had an English which was more beautiful with an English accent. And so whenever I speak, you'll see this guy is from the village. And I kept asking myself, why is a language in Africa was called vernacular? To serve the purpose of communication and expanding the colonial project. But even though, after so many years of colonialism, most African families has driven away from respecting, loving, and appreciating their languages. I was born in a family whereby my parents were divorced. So I lived from foster family to foster family and to my grandmother, who loved Sukuma language. So you will never say shikamo, never say anything. You have to speak in our own language. So I grew up loving the same language. But even though I loved this language at school, for me to pass, for me to be seen as intelligent, as smart, I must be able to speak English. The measure of my intelligence was English. This really disturbed me, because I know many people I've met in Europe, in China, who can speak my language, but I can speak theirs. So who is intelligent?
The word colonization will come up a lot in this season, and it's because it's the biggest contributor to our language factor. I remember seeing a clip of a young woman by the name of Usisiwe Siabe on a talk show describing to a white person what colonization is. What I like about how she puts it is how she personalizes.
Western world. So don't you think there's any double standards? Double standards how? When we, from the day we're born, we are taught to speak like you, dress like you, learn the things you learn. I know your history, I don't even know my own. Let's even go as far back as like something like World War I. When white people were fighting during World War I, black people were nowhere to be found, but I still don't know what we were doing during World War I know all about your history and your people. I have to celebrate Jan van Riebeeck for discovering the cake and so forth, where we seem as if we didn't exist. So from the day that I am born, it's all about you. So how do you then say that I hold the power where you hold the power, because all I know is you? Doesn't make sense. I'm lost. Hence the need for decolonization, not just of higher education.
But of course, none of this is in black and white. It's complicated. Sometimes our backgrounds contribute a lot more than just the idea of being an African. I mean, some people are raised in very un-African backgrounds, but does that really make them less African and more of something else? Take a look at this clip and let me know what you think of what it means to be an African or a black person.
I don't see myself as black.
What do you see yourself as?
I'm a white person.
You live the Afrikaans culture. I mean, your man is Afrikaans.
I don't identify as being black. I was brought up white, so I couldn't learn how to be black. I always thought of marrying a white man. I never had the opportunity to learn from black people. So I'm white.
And then there's just the issue of how English never loved us. Of course, a lot of black people speak English so well, but let's not deny how it can be tricky for some of us. Take a look at this next clip. It's funny, but it's also sad at the same time. I watched it about 10 times before I could start understanding what she's trying to say. I think the worst thing about it for me is that it's two black African people in Africa struggling with a language that isn't African on a predominantly black channel that is to mostly black people. Take a look and decide for yourself. Let me know if you can figure out by watching it once what she's trying to say.
Joined by some of the residents here. Sisi, you said you saw the incident yesterday when it happened. What exactly did you see?
What I see is that, okay, the incident, I was there in a robot. I was coming from to shopping to Boxer, then I just bought to whatever it is, grocer, and it was a tragedy to me. Even now, I'm not okay, but I can speak. What I saw, before, the robots were closed for me to cross. Then I just stand there. Then it was a bomb or something that it was by, I don't know, it came from another way or whatever it is way. Okay, then it was just big bomb, boom, out of the way. Then after, I was so speechless. I stand in, then everybody was running and running. Then what I saw, it was a taxi, a bounce. Then after bouncing the taxi, I saw there was a mother who is selling the umbila nomroho, whatever it is. Then the taxi, that quantum, it broke her to the robot, and that robot and that quantum cut the woman the legs. And then it swept by. I just ran. Then I go there to the butcher. It was the next of my flats. I'm staying the Allied Thomas Street. Then after I go there to the butcher, I was saying that close the door, close the door. And I was so speechless and I was crying. Then after that, they closed the door. Then after, the sound was so clear. What that feel? It was the dizziness. Then I was said, open the door, I want to go home. Then when that I came out, then right after I came out, I see the taxi that from in front of me. So there were people, we just took the bricks, we break the taxi, and we keep some of other people. They were so. I'm not okay. I am not okay. because it's my first time I see the road. The road was so broken and broken, pieces by pieces. Explosion. It's whereby they were saying it was not explosion, it's whereby the explosion. They were saying that it's a gas, but I don't understand which gas they are talking about. I'm staying next to the road. My flat is next to the road. So I don't know, is it unsafe or not? And there is no water, electricity. I'm not okay.
Well,
A book titled Decolonizing the Mind by the great Ngugi Thiong'o will come up a lot during these discussions. Maybe it's important that you get a sense of what that book is about if you haven't read it. Here's a short summary by someone who knows just how to break it down.
Decolonizing the Mind was published in 1986, written by Ngugi wa Thiong'o upon his observation of the deterioration of African languages in favor of the European ones such as English, French, and Portuguese. Decolonizing the Mind is an argumentative magnum opus of sound reasoning. It seeks to address and condemn the replacement of African languages in modern African social circles. As to Ngugi, in order to truly be free of the legacy of colonization, the book boasts of 2 chapters. The language of African literature, the language of African theater, the language of African fiction, and the quest of relevance. Ngugi drew his inspiration from his imprisonment and exile following his production of a controversial 1977 play, Ngahika Ndaende, that had challenged the authoritarian status quo in Kenya at the time. Written in the style of a collection of very strong and compelling essays about how languages are used to mentally cage its victims even after colonization, the essays establish the importance of languages and linguistic freedom, the highly underrated importance of language in any culture. Ngugi believes it is not only a way of speaking to him, but language is in fact a bridge that connects the speakers to such cornerstone aspects such as the people's memory, their historical practices, their customs, their values, their ancestors. Native languages are truly the most that reflect the rhythmical nuances of African life. Ngugi observes that in every imperial setting, language has to be imposed for it to succeed, to render the strong psychological chain upon the colonized. This is not by coincidence, but it's because the colonizers have found that forcing their own language upon the natives is one of the best ways they could cut them from their sense of self and in turn become submissive to them, to develop an inferiority complex that would prevent them from challenging their settlers from seizing their native ancestral lands. Which of course worked.
When it comes to language in Africa and language for Africans and language and how it relates to colonialism, Ngugi wa Thiong'o has so many rich opinions. Here's the great writer himself sharing a bit of his mind about that.
But the mind is affected much more than just the economic materiality, in a sense that there's a tendency for such societies to look for validation from the West. In other words, sometimes the initiatives from within the country are not valued, but if the same initiatives are kind of applauded in European capitals, then people have a tendency to say, oh, that's good, so it's really a mental structure that has to be, that African people have to be aware, in a way, because what is the colonialism of the economy and colonialism of the politics is easy to detect. The one of the mind is sometimes the harder to either detect and eradicate.
Shatnam Palisa Mohammed is one of the most interesting minds I've ever come across, especially when it comes to social issues that affect especially us Black people. I asked her about the importance of mother tongue. Here's what she had to say.
My name is Shabnam Pelesa Mohammed. I'm an activist, journalist, lawyer, and creative from Durban, South Africa. I co-founded Transformative Health Justice. I serve on the steering committee of World Council for Health, and I am the executive director of Children's Health Defense Africa. I'm also the co-founder of the African Sovereignty Coalition. So, of course, central to the subject of mother tongue is sovereignty and being indigenous and language and culture. I'm also deeply passionate around child rights and women's rights and fathers' rights. And so I serve 2 terms on the board of the Advice Desk for the Abused. Having a sense of identity or who we are as human beings is central to our existence. And the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that are carried through generations to come. And so having a respect for and a sense of protection over one's mother tongue is extremely important. And encouraging young people to develop a love for mother tongue equally so. We're now seeing in many parts of our world, including our own country, that young people are unable to speak or even understand their mother tongues because they've also been led to believe that English is the superior language and that you are only intelligent if you are able to speak in English, which, as we know, was brought to the world through brutal colonization and occupation and discrimination and everything that came with it. And so being able to speak in other languages is beautiful, apart from just English, which I understand is functional, but it certainly does not translate the way some of our other languages translate in poetry, perhaps, is the beauty and the richness and the depth of languages and mother tongues. That's something that English certainly cannot completely convey. And I say this as someone who does write poetry in English and understands the richness of poetry in music, for example, and wants to encourage. I want to encourage music as the means to preserve the mother tongue. So the real and evident impact of removing the mother tongue from a child's environment is very clear. They, I think, develop a sense of inferiority, that they are only important and intelligent and taken seriously if they're able to speak English. And when they are speaking in their mother tongues, perhaps, and this is some research we need to do, their peers might not look at them or regard them as highly because they're speaking a mother tongue language. Certainly, in terms of intelligence, we know that people who are bilingual or trilingual or speak multiple languages are highly intelligent. And this erasure of identity of our children needs to be addressed within our families and in our education environments, in our communities, in our faith-based spaces, to encourage people speaking their mother tongue. We have to preserve the mother tongue languages. We can't have a world in which everybody only speaks English. I would advise any parent raising young children, or children in particular, to speak to them in multiple languages. So we're not saying don't speak English at all. We're saying remember to speak to them in their mother tongue as well. We have to preserve languages before they are lost to the world. I would also say encourage them to listen to music from different languages, including your mother tongue, watch films in different languages, including your mother tongue, and have these conversations with them around how important the mother tongue is and why we need to preserve the mother tongue, because it's intrinsically connected with culture and tradition and history and future. And so I would certainly encourage parents to take that conversation with their children very seriously, and also to lead by example, because that's how children learn.
Here's a social media post by one very controversial Tracy Ziller. She writes, "The only reason why you don't learn math, science, accounting, and economics in your African languages is because the economy doesn't belong to you and it doesn't speak your language. If you go to Germany, China, Japan, and other countries, you will never find them teaching those subjects in English. They teach them in their own languages. This is because they are the owners of their economies. Africans are busy competing on who speaks better English than the other. Other nations are busy translating school books into their own languages so that their children have learning advantage of using their own language. An African child reads a question in English, thinks in an African language, and then write an answer in English. Children spend most of their time translating to themselves than learning. A rather harsh reality. The point for me is for us to understand where we come from, how we got here, and if it's necessary to start putting some changes in place for ourselves, for our future, for future generations, or to decide if we're okay with how things are going and how they're going to turn out. For me personally, I feel like as a South African, the ideal world would be where we could all do this.
Nna ke batho ba le ba go tseba go bolela sepedi sa go hlweka sa ka dipukung tša bo okay matsebe ke apele setokwa sa ka mokomeni setokwa sa Ramokgopa ke se apa kudu ka mata bjale ke doa ke budi jore na sona ke yo khola ke apa khilobedu ka khosemojaji ek praat ook suiwer Afrikaans. Ek het met Freek Robinson op Fokus gewerk. Maar ze moet niet zaars wees nie, ek kan ook Kapi praat. Jonga man, ndiyakwazi ukuthetha isiXhosa. Ndandifunda eKapa mna ndifunda nee-classmates ezivela komdantsane uNkoyi Matshoba i-champion zeboxing. Ndiyasazi kakuhle isiXhosa. Akekho futhi umuntu ongakwazi ukuthi mina ngiyakwazi ukukhuluma isiZulu. Into othini ke? Nyalo nongibona angade ngidokhetha lo philwimi niteva ku vulavula Xichangani mina ni xi vulavula kahle ngopfu mi vutisa kokwana Tora loko mi nga ni tshembi ke itse go bua Setswana batho ba kwa Etshuki le ka dira gatsala kwa Botswana TV ke dira kwa Morwalela Sesotho le sona hatši ka nnete ha sena go nhlola ke na le metswalle e mengata e buang Sesotho se setle ebile mme wa.
Now that we are on the same page about what Kitso Ke Pheko is all about, what it's meant to do, and what it hopes to achieve, hopefully we can sit and listen and learn from the individuals that are going to come onto the platform and teach us a thing or two about ourselves, our history, our past, and how we got here. First episode, I have a great writer for you, one of the greatest poets of our time. You tune in on to the next episode. I can promise you, you're going to learn a lot about where we are going, where we come from, and why we should commit to ourselves. Thank you for watching. See you next time. This is Kitso